Who sent you here? Nobody. You clean floors for a living. Yes, and you're telling me you found what $47 million couldn't find. She looked at him straight. I'm telling you, those planes are going to keep falling out of the sky until somebody listens to me. Dead silence. 18 engineers, 6 months. $47 million. One woman with a mop and a piece of paper she'd been carrying in her pocket for 6 weeks. 3 times she'd tried to walk through that door. 3 times they'd thrown her out. She kept the paper anyway, because her father taught her one thing above everything else. Truth doesn't go bad. The engine on flight TC-447 started making noise somewhere over Waxahachie. Not loud noise, not the kind that makes everyone look up from their phones at once. Just a vibration that moved through the cabin floor like a question nobody had asked yet. A tremor, the kind that traveled up through the cushions and into the backs of people's thighs and made them shift without quite knowing why. Then the shaking started. Row 14 felt it first. A woman traveling alone, window seat, had her coffee cup in her hand when the tray table began to rattle. She set the cup down, looked at it. The surface of the coffee was moving in small circles, like something underground was breathing. Then row 12. Then row 9. Then the overhead compartments began to knock. The pilot's voice came over the speaker. Calm, train calm. The specific kind of calm that has nothing to do with being relaxed. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Nobody believed it was turbulence. The sky outside was clear. The kind of clear they'd Dallas visible from 40 miles out. The skyline sitting clean on the horizon in the late afternoon light. No clouds, no weather, nothing to shake them. The knocking from the overhead compartments got louder. A Chilsost in row 7 started to cry. Her mother pulled her close and looked at the flight attendant moving down the aisle with fast, careful steps, and the flight passport asked questions that the flight attendant's face did not answer. In the cockpit, the first officer was already on the radio. Dallas-Fort Worth, this is Transcor 447 declaring emergency. Engine anomaly, requesting immediate approach clearance. They landed 11 minutes later, hard but safe. The aircraft rolled to a stop on the far runway and sat there with emergency vehicles clustered around it, lights going in the dusk. 212 people, all of them breathing, all of them safe. That word, safe. Ray Callahan would hear it many more times before the night was over, and each time it would feel less like comfort and more like a door closing on something he wasn't ready to face. Ray got the call at 3:14 in the morning. He was already awake. He'd been awake since 2. He'd been awake most nights since 2 for the past 3 months, lying in the dark and listening to the how make its ordinary sounds and thinking about he couldn't fix by thinking about them. He sat up when the phone rang, didn't turn on the light, just listened. His operations director gave him the facts in the order they happened. The vibration, the shaking, the emergency declaration, the landing at Dallas-Fort Worth, the passengers. Everyone's okay, the director said. Nobody's hurt. Which flight? TCC-447. Houston to Dallas. Ray was quiet for a moment. How many times has this happened? A pause on the line. Like the director was hoping the question wouldn't come. This makes 11, sir. Ray held the phone a moment after he hung up. Just held it. Sat on the edge of the bed in the dark bedroom of the house he'd lived in for 19 years. The same bedroom. The same dark. A different kind of weight in his chest than there used to be. 11 emergency landings. In 6 months. 11 times the word safe had been used like a bandage over something that kept bleeding. Dottie stirred beside him. She didn't ask what happened. She'd stopped asking 3 months ago. Now she just reached over in the dark and put her hand on his arm. He covered it with his, held it for a few seconds. Then he stood up, put on his clothes, and drove to the airport alone. The hangar at 4 in the morning had its own kind of silence, not the peaceful kind, not the kind you'd want to sit inside. The kind that comes when something large and complicated has been shut off and is just waiting. 31 aircraft, Some in service, some grounded, some with their engine panels open, components exposed under the fluorescent lights, like patients mid-surgery who'd been abandoned on the table. Ray walked between them slowly. He did this sometimes. Just walked. Didn't check his phone. Didn't talk to anyone. Just moved through space and looked at what he'd built and tried to remember how it had felt before the calls started coming in at 3 in the morning. He'd started Transcore Aviation with one leased Cessna and a name he'd written on a napkin in a diner in Youngstown, Ohio. He was 24 years old. He had a commercial pilot's license, 4 years of factory work behind him, and enough money saved for 3 months of lease payments if he was careful about everything else. He was always careful. The first run was cargo. Youngstown to Cleveland and back, 3 nights a week. He'd land at 5 in the morning and drive to the factory for his regular shift and sleep 4 hours and do it again. For 3 years he lived like that, sleeping in his truck sometimes when he was too tired to drive home, eating gas station food, landing in the dark, taking off in the dark, never once feeling like he wanted to stop. He'd learned to fly from an instructor named Pete Galvez, who ran Zans out of a regional airfield east of the cities and smelled like cigarettes and had steadier hands than anyone Ray had ever met. Pete was retired military, didn't talk much, but when he talked, you remembered it. Pete used to say the machine tells you what's happening. Your job is to listen. He said it's doing lessons on the ground going over instruments in the air when something went slightly wrong and Ray was figuring out how to respond. He said it so often that Ray stopped hearing the words the way you stop hearing anything that's always present. It became background. It became air. 25 years later, Ray had 31 aircraft and 10,100 people on payroll and a company worth more than he could have imagined standing in that diner writing on a napkin. And somewhere in those 25 years, without deciding to, he'd stopped listening to the machines himself. He'd hired people to listen for him. He'd trusted other people's ears and other people's readouts and other people's assurances that everything was fine. And now 11 planes had tried to fall out of the sky. He stood in the middle of the hangar, looked at the aircraft directly in front of him, engine panels open, wiring and components visible. He thought about Pete. He thought about the napkin. Then he went home and sat at the kitchen table and watched the sun come up without sleeping. The board meeting was at 9. Ray had been in hundreds of board meetings. He'd gotten good at them the way you get good at anything you do repeatedly with stakes attached. He knew how to read the room before anyone spoke. He knew the difference between concern that wanted to solve something and concern that wanted to be seen being concerned. This one felt different from the first minute. 12 people around the table. The CFO opened with the numbers Ray already knew. Revenue down 31% over 6 months. 3 major corporate contracts suspended pending the investigation. Insurance premiums rising every quarter. Stock price down 40% since January. The safety compliance director followed. The FAA had opened a formal review. Another incident before the cause was identified and corrected will likely mean an operational suspension. Operational suspension, 2 words, meaning no flying. 100 people out of work. Meaning everything Ray had built since age 24, sitting on the ground. He listened to all of it without speaking. Then he looked around the table. "Tell me something I don't know," he said. Nobody answered right away. "Tell me what's wrong with my engines. Tell me why we've had 11 emergency landings and nobody in this room can give me a single explanation that holds up longer than a week." The head of operations cleared his throat. "Ray, the engineering teams have been working around the clock." "I know what the engineering teams have been doing," Ray said. He kept his voice level. "I've been paying them to do it. Consult GE Aviation sent a team. I had researchers from MIT here for 3 weeks." He looked at his CFO. "What's the total?" The CFO checked his screen. $47 million. Ray nodded once, slowly. $47 million. 6 months. 11 aircraft. And nobody in any of those teams has given me an answer that survives contact with the next malfunction. He stood up. So I'll ask again.
Tell me something useful.
Full. Nobody spoke. He left the room. What Ray did not know. Sitting in his car in the parking structure afterward with the engine off and his hands on the wheel was what had happened in the boardroom 11 days before that meeting. 9 directors, 7 votes. The motion, remove Hal Callahan as CEO of TransCore Aviation. It has passed. They weren't acting on it immediately. They'd agreed to give him 60 days. An informal grace period, not in the main board record, decided in a conversation after the vote. 60 days to stabilize the situation, find the cause of the engine failures, show the board something that looked like progress. If he couldn't do that, the formal process would begin. Nobody told him. He found out from Dottie, not because she went looking. That was the thing he'd want people to understand if he ever told this story. Dottie Callahan was not a woman who went through other people's things. She had taught kindergarten for 22 years. She had more patience than anyone he'd ever known, and no tolerance whatsoever for dishonesty. Those 2 qualities had always lived in her comfortably, side by side. What happened was simple and accidental. One of the board members had been using a shared family email account for his board correspondence. His wife was Dottie's friend from their church choir. The wife had forwarded a thread to the wrong address by mistake. The thread included the vote summary and the 60-day agreement. Dottie read it standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea going cold beside her. She read it twice, then she folded it and put it in the pocket of her cardigan. She waited until that evening. Ray was at the kitchen table with engineering reports he'd been staring at without reading for an hour. She sat across from him, put the paper on the table between them. I didn't go looking for this, she said. He looked at the paper, then at her. I know. He unfolded it, read it, folded it back. Outside, an ordinary evening was happening. The neighbor's dog, a car going past on the street, the refrigerator making its regular sound. 60 days, Ray said. 60 days, Dottie confirmed. How many have I used? 23. He picked up his glass of water, set it down without drinking. I need to fix this, he said. I know. Not for them. I know that too. She reached across the table, put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers, and neither of them said anything else that night. There wasn't anything else to say. They'd been married long enough to know when silence was the right language. Brett Holloway had worked for TransCore for 12 years. He was the kind of man who always had an answer. In Ray's experience, that quality was either the most valuable thing a person could bring or most dangerous one. The difference depended entirely on whether the answers were true. Brett was good-looking in a way that cost money to maintain. Good suits, a watch that people noticed. He'd come from a major aerospace firm, credentials that took up most of a page, and Ray had hired him after a 40-minute conversation and had never questioned that decision in 12 years. Brett walked into rooms in a way that made situations feel manageable. He didn't pace, didn't raise his voice. He stood there, calm and certain, explaining complex problems in language that made them sound solvable. For 12 years, that quality had made Ray's life considerably easier. Now, for a reason Ray couldn't name precisely, it made something in his chest feel wrong. Not wrong enough to act on. Just wrong enough to notice, the way you notice when a room is slightly too cold without being able to find the source. The day after the board meeting, Brett came to his office with a new presentation. Clean slides, sharp graphics. Engineering data laid out that looked reassuring before you even read them. I've been going back through everything, Brett said, standing at the front with the ease of someone who had never been publicly wrong. I think we've been looking in the wrong area. He advanced the slide. A diagram of the combustion chamber pressure regulation system. The anomaly signatures are consistent with pressure variance in the combustion chamber, Brett said. Not the fuel systems, not the injectors. We've been focused on the wrong components for 6 months. He looked at Ray directly. I want to recommend a full replacement of the combustion chamber pressure systems across the 11 affected aircraft. Cost, Ray said. 18 million, quiet a room. Brett, Ray said slowly. I've paid $47 million with equipment and expertise, and they all looked at the combustion systems. I know. They didn't find anything. I think they were running the wrong diagnostic parameters. You think Boeing was running the wrong parameters? I think it's possible, yes. Ray looked at him for a long moment, at the slide, back at Brett. 12 years at dinner house, his kids' names, that feeling again. Not accusations, just the sensation of sitting in a cockpit and knowing something was slightly off without being able to point to it yet. Send me the full technical report by tonight, Ray said. Of course. Brett gathered his material and left. Ray sat alone in his office, not thinking hard, just sitting. Looking at the door, the feeling stayed. What happened at 6:23 that evening in the parking structure, Ray didn't see. Brett sat in his car with his phone in his hand. He sat there almost 4 minutes before he made the call. When the line connected, he spoke quietly. They approved the combustion chamber replacement. That buys us another 6 to 8 weeks. A pause. No, she hasn't surfaced yet. I'd know if she had. Another pause. I told you. I'm managing it. Don't do anything. He ended the call, put his phone away, sat another minute looking at the concrete wall in front of him. Then he started his car and drove home. Now, before anything else makes sense, you need to understand Maya Delaney. Not where she ended up, where she came from. Because people like Maya don't become clear if you start at the resolution. You have to go back to the garage and the socket trash and the Saturday mornings, but what she learned so early that she stopped doing, she had learned it. It just became part of how she moved through the world. The way some people hear music in everything. The way some people can look at a person's face and know what they're feeling before they speak. Maya heard machines. She was 28 years old. She slept under the I-45 overpass half a mile from Bush Intercontinental Airport. On a flattened piece of cardboard she'd been refolding for 3 months, with a duffel bag containing 2 work shirts, a pair of canvas work pants, a broken umbrella she kept meaning to throw away and never did, and a photograph in a plastic sleeves she'd had sewn into the lining of the bag so it wouldn't get wet if it rained. The photograph was of her father, Thomas Delaney. Not a famous man, not a man whose name appeared in any record that mattered to anyone outside a 12-block radius of 5th Ward, Houston. He worked out in a one-bay garage on Lockwood Drive for 22 years. He fixed cars mostly. The trucks, when they came in, generators and water pumps and farm equipment and anything else with a motor that someone brought to him. He advertised by word of mouth, which meant he didn't advertise at all. Which meant that the people who knew him deeply, and the people who simply didn't know what they were missing. He had large hands. Hands that were always slightly stained, no matter how many times he washed them. The way mechanics' hands get stained after years of work. The oil working into the lines of the skin until it becomes part of the skin. He moved slowly, deliberately. He almost never hurried. He said once that hurrying was how you missed things. And missing things was how small problems became larger ones. He was the best mechanic Maya had ever seen. She'd seen a lot of mechanics in the years since he'd died. She applied that category carefully, and she'd never once had to revise the conclusion. She used to sit on a wooden stool when she was small. He never told her to go play. Never told her she was in the way. He just worked. And she watched, and occasionally he explained something without being asked, as though he could feel her curiosity and want to answer it before she had to ask. Every engine tells you what's wrong, he used to say. You just have to be still enough to hear it. She'd so much at times that it stopped being a sentence. It became something else, like the smell of the garage or the sound of the ratchet, or the particular way afternoon light came through the one window on the west wall and hit the floor in a long rectangle. Part of the texture of being there. By the time she was 12, she could change a fuel filter. By 14, she could tell you what was wrong with an engine by the sound it made from across the room. Not guessing, not estimating. Listening the way her father had shown her. Patient, still, waiting for the machine to say what it was trying to say. He ate her a trade. He wasn't thinking that far ahead. He was just letting her be near him because she wanted to be, and because having her there made the work feel less solitary. She absorbed everything. The way you absorb anything you're immersed in early and completely. It went into her bones. She was good at school too, good at math, good at science. Her junior year teacher had helped her put together a list of engineering programs, had written her a recommendation letter with real enthusiasm in it, had seemed genuinely invested in where Maya might go. And then Thomas Delaney died. He was 51 years old. She was 18. A November evening, driving home from the garage after a 12-hour day. A driver ran a red light on Jensen Drive and hit his truck on the driver's side. He made it to the hospital. He survived 46 hours. Then he was gone. Maya sat in the hospital corridor after they told her. She sat for a long time. She remembered thinking with a clarity that surprised her, I have $63 in my bank account. The judge rent is due in 11 days. She didn't cry right away. The crying came later. What came first was arithmetic. She was 18 years old, and she was alone, and she had $63 and 11 days until the rent was due on a garage that was her father's name in the world. She tried to keep it going. She really tried. She fixed the cars people brought in, and she charged what her father had charged, and she kept his paperwork the way he'd kept it, and she paid the rent for 4 months. Then the landlord raised it. Then a job she'd been counting on went to a shop with more staff. Then the checking account went to zero in a way that felt permanent. She moved into a room in a shared house in Kashmir Gardens. She got other jobs. Waitressing at a diner on Airline Drive. Cleaning offices at night for a property management company. Stocking shelves at a grocery store in Acres Home. She applied to garages and mechanics shops and any place that had anything to do with engines. The answer was always the same. Do you have certifications? No, but my father taught me everything about. We need certifications. Not a demonstration, not a test, not a trial period. Paper. Certificates with seals and registration numbers and official text. She didn't have any of those things. What she had was her father's knowledge living in her hands, and her ears the way a language lives in someone raised speaking it. You can't unfeel it. It doesn't leave. It's just there, whether or not anyone with authority can see it. Nobody could see it without the paper. 8 years of that. 8 years of jobs that didn't use what she knew, the money getting smaller, the options getting narrower. The room in Kashmir Gardens eventually going the way the garage had gone. 18 months before she met Ray Callahan, she lost her last stable address. 3 months on a friend's couch, then a shelter on Navigation Boulevard. Then, when the shelter's time limit ran out, the I-45 overpass. She wasn't bitter about it. People expected bitterness from someone in her situation, she'd noticed. They expected a specific kind of anger or despair, and when they didn't see it, they assumed she was hiding it. She wasn't hiding anything. She was tired, and her ears still worked. And she had her father's photograph in the lining of her bag. And some nights, lying on the cardboard listening to the planes going over, she felt something that wasn't quite hope but was in the same family as hope. A sense that the knowledge was still there, that it hadn't gone anywhere, that it was waiting for the right moment to be used. She'd learned patience from a man who never hurried. She was still learning it. Months before she met Ray, Maya got a job with Metro Clean Services. Metro Clean had a commercial cleaning contract with Bush Intercontinental Airport. Nights, 4 hours per shift, 11 to 3. The terminals, the administrative offices, the operations corridors, and once a week on Thursdays, the aircraft maintenance facilities. The hourly rate was $22. 4 hours a night, 4 or 5 nights a week, depending on the schedule. Not enough to rent a room in a city where rooms had gotten expensive. Enough to eat. Enough to keep the prepaid phone charged. Enough to exist in the particular way that is different from living, but is at least not dying. The first Thursday Maya walked into the aircraft maintenance area, she stopped moving for a moment. She didn't mean to. Her feet just stopped. The smell hit her first. oil and cold metal and hydraulic fluid, and the specific industrial chill of a space designed and maintained for machines rather than people. Then the sounds, the hum of standing equipment, a distant voice on a radio somewhere. The low groan of something heavy being repositioned. She made herself start walking up again, picked up her mop, did her work. But her ears were already working on their own. The way they always did in spaces with engines. The way they had since she was old enough to sit a stool and listen. She learned the rhythms of the maintenance facility over the following weeks. She looked areas got worked on at which hours. She led the sound profiles of different aircraft types as she cleaned around them during test runs. She learned which engines sounded healthy and which ones sounded like they were working slightly harder than they should be. Supen synthing simmings they some supposed simple sense to be compensating for. She learned the Transcore fleet by sound before she ever looked at a logo. It was a Tuesday in March when she first heard the knock. She was pushing her cart back the storage room after finishing the fuel systems corridor. A Transcore aircraft was being run through a routine engine test in the adjacent bay. Standard procedure before returning to service after maintenance. She heard the engine, and then she heard something underneath the engine, something inside it. Small, the way a voice is small at the back of a crowd. A knock, but not the knock of something loose or obviously broken. More like a pattern. Like something hitting at a fractionally wrong angle over and over, thousands of times a minute. She stopped pushing the cart, closed her eyes. She'd heard that sound before. She was 14 years old, standing in a barn north of the city, where her father had been called about a water pump that 3 other mechanics had already looked at and given up on. Her father had spent 40 minutes listening to that pump before he opened it. Then he'd found the scratches inside the fuel injector nozzle. Tiny ones. Almost invisible without direct light. They'd been changing the spray pattern every time fuel moved through them, accumulating damage pass by pass until the pump was running wrong in ways that looked like something bigger than they were. Dirty fuel, he'd said. Fuel with particles in it. Each time fuel passes through with particles in it, it scratches a little more, until the damage changes when each spring moves, until the spray being wrong changes how the combustion works. Until what you're seeing looks like a major failure when it started as something you could have fixed with a $10 injector. Maya opened her eyes. She looked at the Transcore aircraft raft through the bay door, counted the engine positions from the left. Engine 3. She found the parts disposal area, a bin of contents removed from service, waiting for documentation before recycling. She looked through it until she found a fuel injector of the right type, held it for the fluorescent light, turned it slowly, changed the angle, changed it again. There they were, fine scratches inside the nozzle bore, barely visible without the right light and the right angle. But there, and she recognized them the way you recognize the face of someone you've met before in a different context. The pattern, the location, the meaning. She stood holding that injector for a long time. Then she found a blank Metro Clean work order form in her cart, turned it over, took out the pen she kept in her breast pocket, and wrote everything down. The date, the time, the aircraft tail number, she'd noted it through the bay door, the engine's position. A description of the sound and what it meant. A description of the scratches and what they indicated, the likely cause. The recommended action. She wrote neatly, precisely. The way her father had kept his repair logs. Every observation documented. Nothing assumed. Nothing embellished. When she finished, she folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket. At 7 the next morning, she walked to the Transcore Contract Center entrance and asked to speak to someone in the maintenance department. The security guard looked at her Metro Clean uniform. He told her she could submit a general concern through the airport's contractor portal. The link was on the Metro Clean bulletin board in her break room. She said the concern was about aircraft safety. He repeated the information about the portal. She left. She tried twice more. Different days, different approaches. different words. Once she asked specifically for a maintenance supervisor and was told one wasn't available. Once she was told to wait and sat in a plastic chair for 40 minutes and was then told that the person she was waiting for had already left for the day. She kept the paper. Every few nights, she'd take it out in the quiet under the overpass and read it back to herself, making sure she logic still held, making sure she hadn't imagined something or overstated it. She hadn't. The details were the same every time she read them. The observation was the same. The conclusion followed from the observation the same way it always had. Truth doesn't go bad, her father used to say. Write it down and it keeps. She kept it in her pocket on work nights. She kept it on her days off too after a while. Just because she'd stopped trusting herself to remember where she'd put it if she left it behind. More transcore engines were making the sound now. She'd learned their schedule by ear. She knew which aircraft were being used on which routes. She knew that whatever was wrong was getting worse. She couldn't get a door open. She talked to her father sometimes, not out loud, just in her head, the way she'd been talking to him for 10 years, the conversation that had never really ended just changed form. Papa, I found what's wrong with those planes. I wrote it down. I've tried 3 times and nobody will listen. But I found it. She could picture him in the garage, hands wrapped around a coffee cup. That particular half-smile that meant he was listening and thinking at the same time. Keep the paper. Truth doesn't go bad. On a Wednesday evening in April, 8 months into her Metro Clean job, Maya was pushing her cart past the engine test bay when she stopped. Not because she decided to stop, because the sound from the aircraft being tested in Bay 3 was worse than the last time she'd heard it. More pronounced. The knock was easier to find now, sitting higher in the engine's sound, not as buried as it had been in March. Whatever was accumulating was still accumulating. She stood at the edge of the bay with her eyes closed. She was so focused on listening that she didn't hear the man approach. When he spoke, she opened her eyes and turned, and for a fraction of a second, her face did what faces do when someone expects to be told to move along. "What do you hear?" he said. He was standing about 10 feet away, a man in a good jacket, probably late 40s or early 50s, watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Not hostile, not amused. Something more careful than either of those. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was just—" "What do you hear?" he said again. She stopped. Because the second time wasn't the same as the first time. The first time could have been impatience or a challenge. The second time was a question. A genuine one. He was actually asking. She looked at the aircraft, then back at him. "Something's wrong with the fuel spray," she said. "Engine 3. The spray pattern has been off for at least 6 weeks. It's getting worse." He didn't say anything. "I think the injectors have scratches inside the nozzle bore," she continued. "From contaminated fuel. Particles in the fuel pass through the injector with every cycle and scratch a little more each time, until the spray angle is wrong by enough degrees that the combustion changes. Until the engine starts producing the symptoms you've been seeing." She said all at once. Not because she'd planned to. Because she'd been carrying it for 6 weeks and someone was standing still in front of her actually asking. "The scratches are below the threshold that automated diagnostics flag," she said. "The software looks for failure. This isn't failure yet. It's damage. That comes MC failure slowly. That's why it looks like something structural when it's actually so much smaller." Ray was very still. The engine ran in the bay. The fluorescent lights threw pale rectangles across the tarmac. "How do you know this?" he said. "My father was a mechanic," she said. "He taught me to listen." "How long have you been trying to report this?" She met his eyes. 6 weeks. 6 weeks, he said. "Yes. Temps, different people, different entrances." Something moved across his face, not anger, exactly. More like the particular expression of a man understanding something he should have understood sooner. "Do you have it written down?" he said. Her hand went to her jacket pocket. She took out the folded paper, the work order form. Her handwriting on the back, she held it out to him. He took it, unfolded it, read every word, read it a second time. The engine ran. The lights hummed. He folded the paper, kept it. What's your name? He said. Maya. Maya Delaney. He held her gaze for a moment. I'm Ray Callahan, he said. I own these aircraft. She didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything obvious to say to that. He owned the aircraft. She cleaned the building they lived in. The distance between those two facts was specific and large, but he was still holding her paper. Come with me, he said. She almost didn't go. 4 seconds of standing there while he walked away, expecting her to follow. The calculation running faster than she could fully track. She had $41. She needed this job. She had psychiatric evidence that people with authority did not want to hear what she'd had to say. She had 3 attempts and 3 closed doors, and 40 minutes she's sitting in a plastic chair, waiting for someone who'd already left. 4 seconds. Then she thought about what her father would do. He would pick up his wrench. He would walk through the door. He would say what he knew and show what he'd found and let the machine speak for itself.
Because the machine tells you what's happening.
And if you've heard it, you owe it your voice. She grabbed her cart, left it beside the bay door, and followed Ray Callahan inside. The maintenance operations room was a serious room. The play Maya had looked through its window on her cleaning rotation, just a glance each time, never lingering. Inside, it was more serious than it looked through glass. Whiteboards covered with diagrams, a long central table. Monitors running data, she recognized the structure of, even without knowing, the aircraft's specific parameters. Ray picked up the desk phone and made 2 calls, short ones, 4 minutes total. He didn't explain who he was calling or why. When he hung up, he sat down across from her. Tell me everything, he said, from the beginning. So she did, all of it. The sound she'd first heard in March, and how she'd recognized it from her father's work on a water pump 14 years ago, the specific quality of the knock, and where it sat in the engine's frequency range, the injector from the disposal bin, what she'd seen under the Zenzub's mechanism, how particle damage accumulates in fuel injectors over time, why automated diagnostics miss it, why the symptoms got worse instead of better the longer it went unaddressed. She didn't rush. She said what she knew in the order she knew it, the way her father had always taught her to document a repair. Complete, sequential, no shortcuts. Ray listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, You've had this written down for 6 weeks. Yes. And you tried to report it 3 times. Yes. He nodded. Slowly. Then he stood up and made a call. Brett Holloway arrived 8 minutes later. Brett came in the way he came into every room, filling the doorway with settled competence. He looked at Ray, then at Maya, then back at Ray. His face did something small, almost invisible. Not quite surprise. The expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing and is now watching it arrive and adjusting his next moves accordingly. Then it was gone, replaced by his professional face. You called me in at night, he said to Ray. I did. This is Maya Delaney. She works maintenance here. I want you to hear what she has to say directly from her. Brett turned to Maya, attentive, open, professionally prepared to listen. She told him everything she'd told Ray. Same information, same order. She watched his face while she spoke. It stayed professionally attentive the whole time, which was, she thought, its own kind of answer. When she finished, Brett picked up her paper from the table. Read it, set it down. That's a thorough observation, he said. Given your background. He shifted slightly toward Ray, making the conversation bilateral between the two of them. Our diagnostic runs on the fuel systems have been comprehensive. If there were spray deviations significant enough to produce these baits of failure patterns, the software would have identified it. Unless the software was calibrated for catastrophic failure thresholds, Maya said. Brett looked at her. Unless it wasn't scanning for a cumulative deviation below alert thresholds, she continued, because that kind of damage doesn't trigger automated warnings. It just builds quietly until it becomes something else entirely. Silence in the room. Patient. The smile of a man who has decided his response while he's sort of responding. Ray, he said, I understand the pressure you're under right now, but we can't make fleet-wide diagnostic decisions based on an observation from someone without aviation credentials. Who told you? Maya said quietly. That I don't have credentials. Brett looked at her. Do you have FAA certifications? No. Airframe and power plant qualifications? No. My father ran a garage for 22 years. I sat beside him from the time I was 6 years old. I know what I heard, and I know what I found. And those two things are connected in a way I can explain in technical detail, if you want me to. Brett looked at Ray with the careful expression of a man communicating concern about the direction of a conversation. Send an injector to an outside lab, Ray said. Brett paused. Ray, physicals examination, not software. A person looking at it under proper magnification and lighting. If she's wrong, we've spent 2 days and a lab fee. If she's right. He didn't finish the sentence. That's a reasonable request, Brett said. Even smooth. I'll arrange it first thing tomorrow. Tonight, Ray said. There are labs that run overnight, you know that. A moment. Tonight, Brett said. He moved to the far end of the room and made calls in a low voice. Ray looked at Maya. She looked back at him. Something moved between them that wasn't quite speech. Some recognition of what had been said and what hadn't, and what was still coming. What Maya didn't see 15 minutes later in the parking structure while Ray's assistant showed her to a waiting area was Brett standing beside his car in the dark. They're sending a component to Lakeland testing tonight, he said quietly into his phone. Physical examination. I couldn't redirect it. A pause. You need to think about what your documentation looks like. The original testing records, the filtration certification records from 18 months ago. Make sure your side is clean. He listened. I'll handle Ray. Just do what I'm telling you. He hung up, stood in the parking structure, looking at the concrete wall. Then he got in his car and drove home. The waiting area had 2 chairs and a vending machine. Maya sat in one of the chairs and did not sleep. She was too alert, too aware of the sounds of the building around her, the distant movement of people somewhere. The specific feeling of being inside a place that had been closed to her and not knowing how long she'd be permitted to stay. She took the photograph from her jacket, her father in front of the garage, squinting into the sun, socket wrench in his hand forgotten there. He looked tired. He often looked tired in photographs, but he was smiling. I told someone, she said quietly. Someone who stayed to listen. The vending machine hummed. She put the photograph back carefully and folded her hands and waited. Ray's phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. He was already at his desk. He'd been there since 6, doing the thing he'd been doing for 3 months, which was reading engineering reports he understood completely and couldn't do anything useful with. The $47 million of reports, the 6 months of reports, the reports that kept saying nothing had been found, and then something else went wrong. The call was from Lakeland Testing. A Dr. Abernathy, whose voice carried the practice test flatness of someone accustomed to delivering findings that people found difficult. Mr. Callahan, we've completed the physical examination of the component you submitted. Go ahead. There are internal surface scratches on the nozzle bore. Multiple scratches. The pattern is consistent with repeated abrasive contact from particulate matter passing through with the fuel supply. Ray held the phone very still. When we modeled the effect of these scratches on spray geometry, we found angle deviation of approximately 13 degrees off. That degree of deviation falls below the alert thresholds of standard diagnostic software. It won't flag in a routine scan. But sustained operation with that deviation produces combustion irregularities consistent with the incident profiles, consisting associated with your aircraft type. What else? Ray said, because he could hear in the man's voice that there was more. We found embedded metallic particles on the nozzle. This composition suggests they originated in a fuel filtration system, specifically degraded filtration media. If this component is representative of the injector condition across your affected aircraft, it is, Ray said. I'm certain it is. Then you're looking at a fleet-wide injector replacement and a thorough audit of your fuel supply chain. Ray thanked him and hung up. He sat for a moment. Not long, just. Then he called his assistant and told her to find Maya Delaney and bring her in. Then he called Brett Holloway and said, My office now. His assistant found Maya at the Metro Clean Depot at 7:15, checking in her cleaning cart after her overnight shift. She was told Mr. Callahan wanted to see her at 8. Maya walked to the community center on Boundary Street that had reliable hot water in the public bathroom. She changed into her second shirt, combed her hair, looked at herself in the mirror for a moment without judgment, just taking inventory. Then she walked to the airport. The guard at the contractor entrance on the south side called up upstairs, waved her through. Nobody stopped her at the door. Brett arrived in Ray's office first. He sat across the desk in the chair he'd occupied 100 times in 12 years. He looked exactly as he always looked. That was the thing Ray kept noticing. Even now, even with the Lakeland report sitting on the desk between them, Brett Holloway looked like himself, composed, ready. Whatever internal adjustments he was making them faster than they showed. Ray put the report on the desk and turned it to face Brett. Brett read the key passages. Set it down. The lab confirmed it, Ray said. I see that. Scratches in the injector nozzle. Particulate contamination in the fuel supply. Spray deviation below diagnostic alert thresholds. Everything she'd described. Brett said nothing. How long have you known the fuel supply was the problem? Ray said. I haven't known. I had some early concerns about the Meridian contract, but the diagnostic data didn't. Brett, the name stopped him. Ray said it the way you say something when you're done with preamble. The Meridian contract, Ray said. You recommended it. You negotiated it. You signed off on it outside the standard procurement process. The timeline was compressed. There's a consulting company, Ray said. Whitmore Advisory Solutions, registered in your wife's name. It received $2.3 million in payments, starting 2 months after the Meridian fuel contract was signed. The room went quiet enough that Ray could hear the aircraft moving on the tarmac far below. Brett sat very still for a moment. Then he leaned back slightly. Made a decision. Ray could see him making it. You need to think very carefully about what you do with this, Brett said. Your name is on the executive budget approval. Your signature authorized the Meridian contract at the CEO level. If this becomes a regulatory matter, the FAA is going to see a management chain that approved with contaminated fuel and kept 11 aircraft in service. They're not going to separate me from you as cleanly as you're imagining. Ray looked at him. I'm trying to give you a way through this, Brett said. The fuel issue gets corrected. The injectors get replaced. The incidents stop. Nobody has to know the specific history of how we got here. You get your company back. I resigned, sighing quietly. We both move on. Ray was very still for a long moment. He thought about the napkin. Transcore Aviation is in his own handwriting in a diner in Youngstown. 24 years old and certain. The way you're only certain when you have nothing to lose and everything to build. He thought about his father, who had spent 31 years on an assembly line and had never cheated anyone and had never suggested that Ray should either. He thought about the woman's in the Cessna voice in his memory. Pete, the machine tells you what's happening. Your job is to listen. He'd stopped listening. He knew that now. He'd trusted this man's voice over the machines themselves and over the woman who'd been listening to them all along. Get out of my building, Ray said. Brett looked at him. You have until this conversation ends to leave voluntarily, Ray said. That's the offer on the table. Brett stood, straightened his jacket, looked at Ray with an expression that was almost, but not quite regret. Then he walked out. Ray picked up his phone. Stuart Bull called his attorney, called his CFO. Then, after a pause of about 30 seconds, called the FAA Aviation Safety Hotline directly. He told them everything, all of it, in the order it happened, including every part that had his name on it. Maya arrived at 8. She came through the south entrance, the same door she'd used for months of overnight shifts. Up in the elevator to the floor she'd never been on, down the carpeted corridor, past the glass walls and the city below. Ray's assistant brought her to his office. Ray was at his desk. He stood when she came in, gestured at the chair across from his. He sat across from her, not behind the desk. Heaped the Lakeland report on the table between them. She leaned forward and read the key sections, read them twice, then looked up. "You were right," he said. "I know," she said. Then, quieter. "My father would have found it too." Ray looked at her for a moment. "Tell me about him," she told him. "Look, the garage on Lockwood Drive, 22 years of it. The large, stained hands, the patience, the way he explained things without being asked. She didn't learn without knowing she was learning. He taught you to hear engines," Ray said. "He taught me to be still enough to hear them," she said. "That's different." The hearing was always there. He just showed me how to stop making noise long enough to use it. Ray was quiet for a moment. "How old were you when he died?" 18. "And after that?" She told him that too. The garage, the warmth she'd tried to keep it. The certifications nobody would look past. The jobs, the slow narrowing of options. The overpass. She said it plainly. Not performing toughness and not performing vulnerability. Just saying what had happened in the order it happened. Ray listened to all of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to ask you something." "Okay, Meridian Industrial, the fuel supplier. When you saw their documentation in the maintenance area, their logo, did that name mean anything to you?" She looked at him. The logo looked familiar, red and black, an M, but I couldn't place it. Ray reached into the folder beside him and took out a single printed page, turned it, set it on the table. It was a complaint record, official formatting, a case number, a date 10 years ago. She leaned forward. "Read the complainant's name in the box at the top. Thomas Delaney." She pleached it twice. She looked up at Ray. "Your father filed a formal complaint against Meridian Industrial 10 years ago," Ray said. "Documented contamination issues affecting agricultural pump equipment in the Houston area." His complaint named Meridian specifically and included his field observations and statements from affected customers. Maya was very still. The complaint was reviewed by a regional equipment standards board and dismissed within 6 weeks. The board's finding noted insufficient technical documentation from a non-certified source. He paused. 3 months after the dismissal, your father lost service contracts with his 3 largest accounts. All 3 transferred to a different shop within a 4-month window. Maya looked at the paper, at her father's name in the box, at the date. She was 18 when that date happened. She didn't know it had happened. He'd never told her. "He never mentioned it to me," she suspected. "You were 18, Ray said. You'd just lost your mother when you were small, and he'd just gotten this dismissal and those contracts. He may not have wanted to add it to what you were already carrying." She thought about that year, the year she was 18, the year he died. She remembered him being tired. She'd thought it was grief, the grief he carried quietly, the way he carried everything. Now she was recalibrating. The tiredness had other causes than she'd known. He reported it correctly, she said. He documented it the right way. He told the truth to the right people. Yes, and they dismissed him because he didn't have credentials. Oops. Yes, and then he lost his clients. Yes. She sat with that for a while. Something was moving through her chest that was old and new at the same time. Old because it was about her father, and all of that was old. New because this was a shape she hadn't had before for what had happened to him, a specific cause, a specific wrong. Named and documented. He was right, she said. Her voice was steady. She kept it steady. He knew exactly what was wrong, and he told the truth about it, and nobody listened, and it cost him everything. Yes, Ray said. He died right. Ray didn't say anything. He just sat there and let her have the silence and didn't try to fill it with words that would have been too small for what the silence was holding. After a while, she looked back at him. "What happens now?" she said. "I've already called the AFAA," he said. "I gave them everything. The Lakeland report, the Meridian contract, payment records from Brett's arrangement, all of it." He paused, including the parts with my own name on them. She studied his face. "Your attorney told you not to. He told me to wait and review my exposure first. And you called anyway." "Yes." She held his gaze. "Why?" Yet he was quiet for a moment, being honest with himself before he answered. Because I built this company on the idea that you do the work right, he said. That you tell the truth even when the truth costs you something. I lost track of that, somewhere. I set someone I trusted make decisions I should have been making. I stopped listening to what was actually happening and started listening to what I was told was happening. He looked at the window. I'm not going to make it worse by hiding. Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. Once. The slow nod of recognizing something real in another person. The days that followed were not simple. Ray's attorney called 3 times in 4 days, each call covering the same territory. Ray's signature on the budget approval. Ray's name on the Meridian contracts authorizations. The legal landscape of a CEO who had been manipulated authorizing a corrupt arrangement without knowing it was corrupt. Each time, Ray gave the same answer. He wasn't changing what he'd told the FAA. He wasn't adding to it or subtracting from it. He'd told them what happened, and they could proceed from there. Dottie heard the 3rd call from the kitchen doorway. When Ray hung up, she said, "Your father would be proud of you." Ray looked at her for a moment. He'd say, "I should have been paying more attention." Both things can be true. He almost smiled. Almost. What Brett Holloway was doing in those same days, Ray learned later in fragments from the legal process. Brett had gone to his attorney within hours of leaving Ray's office. The attorney was good at what he did, which was constructing defensible positions out of difficult facts. The position they constructed leaned heavily on Ray's signature. On the argument that a CEO who signs budget approvals is responsible for what those approvals enable. On the contention that Brett had been acting within his delegated authority, and that any additional arrangements were outside the scope of Ray's knowledge, through no deliberate effort of concealment. It was technically arguable, which is different from being true. Brett also made calls to Meridian's regional contact. Those calls were logged. The calls discussed documentation, specifically which records existed, and which might be said not to exist. Those conversations were also recovered later as part of the investigation, and they said clearly what Brett had been hoping they would prevent. Brett was a smart man who had made a calculation and had been managing the consequences of that calculation ever since. He'd trusted his ability to manage situations. He'd managed plenty of them over 12 years. Had managed engineers who got too close to the fuel systems. He'd managed inquiries with redirections that looked like genuine technical assessment. He'd managed Ray's trust for 12 years by being genuinely good at most of his job. He had not anticipated Maya Delaney. He had not anticipated a woman cleaning the maintenance corridor at 2 in the morning, who would stop beside an engine test bay and close her eyes and hear what $47 million worth of engineering equipment had failed to find. He had not anticipated the note she'd kept for 6 weeks. He had not anticipated a CEO who would listen to her. Those were the things he hadn't calculated for. The FAA investigation began within days of Ray's call. It moved at the speed of federal investigations, which is measured and careful and not quick. There were interviews, document requests, subpoenas for Meridian's records, parallel inquiries that reached into the company's history of fuel supply contracts across the Houston area. The shape emerged was clear. Meridian Industrial had a history of filtration certification issues that predated their TransCore contract by several years. Brett Holloway had accepted a financial arrangement structured through the consulting company registered to his wife in exchange for recommending Meridian to TransCore and for subsequently managing the internal investigation to prevent the fuel supply from being identified as the cause of the failures. The 11 emergency landings, the $47 million, the 6 months of dead ends, all of it traceable to a dinner and then a number that Brett had said yes to. And beneath all of that, 10 years earlier, a mechanic named Thomas Delaney, who had seen the same problem in smaller machinery and told the truth about it and been dismissed and lost everything for it. The complaint he'd filed was entered into the FAA record as evidence of a pattern. The board's official finding on that complaint was also entered. The two documents together told a story about what happens when someone without credentials sees something true and tells the right people, and the right people died that credentials matter more than evidence. A paralegal on Ray's legal team sent Maya a copy of that section of the record, just those pages. Maya read them at a desk. She would have a desk by then, as she wasn't there yet, but she would be. The 60-day board question resolved itself at roughly the 8-week mark after the Lakeland results. The fleet repairs were underway. The FAA investigation was proceeding. Brett's arrest was imminent. The stock price, which had been in free fall, had stabilized once the company announced that the cause of the failures had been identified and that corrective action was in progress. Ray called for a board meeting himself. He didn't wait for them. He sat at the head of the table and looked around it and said, "I know about the vote." The room went very still. "I know what was decided and when and why. I know you gave me an informal window to fix it. I want to address it directly." He looked at each of them. "Here is where we are. The engine failures have been traced to contaminated fuel from a supplier whose contract was arranged by Brett Holloway in exchange for personal payment. Brett has been arrested. The fuel supplier is under FAA suspension. The fleet is in the process of being fully repaired. The first test flight has already confirmed the repairs are working." He paused. "The person who identified the actual cause of these failures has been employed here for 8 months as a Metro Clean contractor. She identified the problem 6 weeks before she was able to get anyone to listen to her. She tried 3 times to report it and was turned away each time. When she finally got in front of me directly and I sent her findings to an outside lab, the results came back in 41 hours. He let that sit for a moment. You wanted to know if I could fix it. It's fixed. But how it got fixed is something this board needs to think about, because it tells us something about what we were rewarding and what we were ignoring. We were ignoring the woman who cleaned our maintenance corridor and knew more about our engines than anyone we paid $47 million to find. The director who had led the vote to remove sat back in his chair. He looked at Ray for a moment. "The formal process won't be initiated." Ray nodded once. "But I want a governance review," the director said. "Supplier contracts, procurement bypass procedures, independent technical audit processes. I want proposals on those within 30 days. You'll have them in 20, Ray said. The meeting ended. The fleet repair took 3 weeks. Every fuel injector across all 11 affected aircraft was replaced. Meridian's contract was terminated and became part of the civil litigation alongside the criminal proceedings. A new fuel supplier, Verity Air Fuels out of San Antonio, was contracted after Ray's team spent 5 days verifying their filtration certification records in detail. Ray read the Verity contract himself before signing it. Every page. The first post-repair test flight was a Tuesday morning. Ray stood on the tarmac with his operations director. Neither of them spoke while the test pilot worked through the startup sequence. The engines came alive. Ray closed his eyes. He listened the way Pete had shown him, patient, still, waiting for the machine to say what it was saying. 4 engines, running clean, steady, no buried knock, no fractional wrong note in the sound of them, just engine noise, even and full and right, doing what it was designed to do. That's what they're supposed to sound like, his operations director said. Yeah, Ray said. It is. The test pilot ran the full protocol. 2 hours, hard maneuvers, rapid altitude changes, maximum cruise, every stress test in the book. When the aircraft crawled back to the gate, the pilot came down the stairs and walked over to Ray. "Sir," he said, "that was the smoothest flight I've had since January." Ray nodded. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. He just stood on the tarmac in the morning sun and felt for the first time in 6 months like the ground under him was solid. The all-staff meeting was Ray's idea, not his PR team's idea. They had a lot of ideas about how to handle communications. Carefully worded statements, a focus on forward momentum, language that acknowledged difficulty without assigning it to anyone specific, language designed to be true in a narrow sense while being misleading in a broader one. Ray listened to all of it. He thanked the PR director. He called his assistant and said he needed every employee on site or on video for a Thursday morning meeting. All shifts, all departments, everyone. His assistant said, "That's over 2,000 people. I know how many people work here." The meeting happened in the main operations hangar, the biggest space they had. Folding chairs in rows, screens at either end. Video feed for the satellite locations and for the overnight staff who were usually asleep at this hour, but who came in because the message said to. There were else standing at the back and along the sides. Ray stood at the front with no podium, no prepared remarks, nothing written down. Just himself and the room full of people who had spent 6 months working for a company that was publicly in trouble and not always knowing why. He looked at the room for a moment before he spoke. I made a mistake, he said. The room went very quiet. Not the polite quiet of an audience being attentive. The quiet of people who had been waiting for something honest and were now hearing it. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. I trusted him for 12 years, and I stopped checking whether that trust was warranted. And because I wasn't checking, that trust cost this company 18 months of problems and cost our passengers 18 months of fear. He paused. 11 emergency landings. 11 times people on our aircraft were afraid for their lives and had reason to be. That is on me. Not only on Brett Holloway. On me. Because I was the one responsible for what happened on my watch and I didn't catch it. He let that land. I want to tell you how it was caught. Because I think you should know. He looked toward the back of the room. The person who found this problem has been working in this building for 8 months. She works the overnight cleaning rotation for Metro Clean. She noticing something wrong with an engine sound in March. She wrote it down in detail with the date and her observations and her assessment of the cause. She tried 3 times to report it and was turned away each time. She kept the paper anyway. 6 weeks she carried it in her pocket because she knew what she knew and she wasn't going to let go of it. When she got in front of me and I sent her findings to an independent lab, the results came back in 41 hours. Everything she described, the scratches, the contamination, the deviation the software wasn't finding. All of it exactly the back. Her name is Maya Delaney. 2,000 heads turned. Maya was standing near the back wall. She'd come through the south entrance and found a spot near the door, which was where she always positioned herself in spaces she hadn't been invited into before. She was in her Metro Clean jacket because she'd come from her shift and nobody had told her what the meeting was about, or that her name would be said in front of everyone. The applause started slowly. The mechanics and overnight crew at the back started it. The people who worked the same hours Maya worked, who knew what it meant to be in a building every night and to be seen or not seen, depending entirely on who was looking. It moved forward through the rows of chairs, building as it went until it filled the hangar. Maya stood very still. She'd smile automatically. She just stood there, straight-backed, and let it happen. Her face was controlled in a way that took visible effort, and she didn't pretend otherwise. Ray waited for the room to settle. She found what $47 million couldn't find, he said. She found it because her father taught her to listen, and because she didn't let go of the truth even when nobody would open the door. He looked at her across the length of the hangar. I owe her an apology. For every door that was closed. After the meeting, Ray's assistant brought Maya upstairs. She'd been to Razi's office once before. She crossed to the window and stood there a moment, the city below, the runways, and the ball 440 overpass if you knew where to look. Small from this, she could see both from the same window where she'd been and where she was standing now. Ray came in. He sat in the chair across from the desk, not behind it. I have an offer to make, he said. Okay, a position in technical operations, engine systems inspection. Your work would focus on what automated diagnostics miss. Manual inspection protocols, physical examination integrated with the digital systems, so neither one operates in isolation. She looked at him. I also want to sponsor your FAA certification, airframe and power plant credentials, full tuition, paid study leave scheduled around your role here. He paused. The salary I can give you right now if you want it. She was quiet for a moment. Why the meeting? She said. Why say my name in front of everyone? Because people who find the truth deserve to be seen finding it, not just quietly thanked and moved forward from seen. My father reported Meridian 10 years ago, she said. He documented it the right way, in the right format, to the right people. He was dismissed because he didn't have credentials. He lost his 3 biggest accounts within 4 months of the dismissal. She paused. He died that same year, tired, without knowing he'd been right. I know, Ray said. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad, she said. I'm saying it's success because it's the reason I kept that paper. 6 weeks in my pocket. 3 closed doors. I kept it because he kept his. Because he believed that writing the truth down mattered even when nobody read it. She held his gaze. He was right, and he never found out he was right. Ray was quiet for a moment. He found out through you, he said. That's not nothing. She considered that. It wasn't nothing. It was something she'd have to sit with for a while. I want the job, she said. I want the certification. And I want one other thing. Name it, a training fund. For people doing maintenance and ground-up work who have practical skills and no paper, open application, assessed on demonstrability, not education history, and not only TransCore employees, anyone in the field who can show what they know. Ray was still. Named after my father, she said. The Thomas Delaney Fund. He didn't ask for time. He didn't consult anyone. Done, she nodded once. Then, yes, I accept. The formal case moved at the pace of federal proceedings. Brett Holloway's attorney was good at constructing defensible positions, and he constructed one. It leaned on Ray's signatures, on the argument that a CEO who authorizes budget approvals bears responsibility for what those approvals enable, on the contention that Brett's additional arrangements were hidden from Ray, and that therefore Ray should share the exposure. The problem with the defense was the records. The wire transfers were what they were. The emails between Brett and Meridian's contact were what they said. The timeline of when Brett had received information about the fuel quality issues, what he'd done with that and how he'd redirected the internal investigation. All of that was documented in ways that made the defense's argument technically interesting and factually unconvincing. Brett was convicted on all 3 counts, 17 months after the arrest. Wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, federal aviation safety violations. Ray's attorney sent him a brief the evening of the verdict. Ray read it, put it in a drawer, went to bed at a reasonable hour. Meridian Industrial's operating certification was revoked. Their principals faced separate civil proceedings brought by TransCore and by other former clients, whose equipment problems were now traceable to the same filtration failures. The scope of the damage, once it was publicly connected across multiple clients, was larger than even Ray had known. Maya started in technical operations on a Monday morning in June. Her desk was in the corner of the inspection coordination office, near the window that looked out over the maintenance bays. She put one thing on it before anything else: the photograph of her father. Plain wood frame. Her father outside the garage, squinting into the sun, socket wrench in his hand. She built the manual inspection protocol in her first 3 weeks. She'd been thinking about it since the meeting with Ray. She knew what she was looking for, and she knew why the existing systems missed it. She designed a step-by-step process for physical examination of fuel system components, integrated with the existing diagnostic software so that each informed the other. Specific lighting requirements, specific magnification, specific documentation at each stage. It added between 90 minutes and 2 hours to the inspection cycle for each affected aircraft type. She presented it to the maintenance team lead, a man named Darren, who had 19 years in aviation maintenance and had seen a lot of new people come in with new ideas and had developed a calibrated skepticism about most of them. He looked at the protocol, asked 3 technical questions. She answered them in detail. He said, on it the next 3 aircraft coming through. I want to see the documentation. She ran it on the next 3 aircraft. Found nothing on the first 2, both of which were recently serviced. Found early-stage nozzle wear on an injector in the 3rd aircraft. An aircraft with 63 hours on a recently replaced component set. Small, pre-symptomatic. The kind of thing that became an incident 6 months from now if nobody caught it today. She logged it, flagged it. The component was replaced. Darren came to find her that afternoon. He didn't make a speech about it. He said, "Good catch." Then he went back to his work. The protocol was adopted for all aircraft in the affected fleet category within 6 weeks of her starting. Within 4 months, it was standard procedure across the entire Corps maintenance operation. The certification coursework was harder than she'd expected and easier than she'd feared. She'd been afraid that formal education would try to replace what she already knew with something more standardized, that she'd have to unlearn things to make room for the official version. It didn't work that way. Mostly, the coursework gave her language for what she already knew. Names for principles she'd been applying without names. Frameworks that organized knowledge she'd had in a different form. There were things she learned that were genuinely new, systems and components outside what her father's work had touched. Those she studied hard. She went to class 3 evenings a week at the Houston Aviation Technical Institute, a 15-minute drive from the airport. She sat in the 3rd row, not the front. Not because she was uncertain, but because the 3rd row was a good position. She could see the board, and she watched the other students, and she could hear when someone in the room had a question they were deciding whether to ask. She did the reading on her lunch breaks at the airport. She did the problem sets in the evening before the class she wasn't attending that night. She took the practice exams under timed conditions at her kitchen table. She passed the written examination on her first attempt. The practical examination was on a Saturday morning in October. 3 months into the coursework, an FAA's examiner named Goodwin, a compact woman in her 50s, with the manner of someone who had examined a great many people and was not easily impressed and was not trying to be. Goodwin gave Maya a fuel systems component with a fault she was to identify using physical examination only. No diagnostic software, no assistance. Maya held the component under the examination lights for 6 minutes. She identified 2 faults. One Goodwin had introduced, one that was pre-existing in the component, a manufacturing irregularity that the examination materials noted was included as a secondary challenge for the candidates who finished early. Goodwin looked at her notes, looked at Maya. "Where'd you learn fuel systems?" she said. "My father's garage," Maya said, 5th Ward. "He ran it for 22 years. Goodwin wrote something in her notes. Then she said, "You passed." Maya drove home from the examination center and sat in her apartment for a while. The certificate wouldn't arrive for 2 weeks, but the result was real from the moment Goodwin sat. She looked at the photograph on her kitchen counter, her father squinting into the sun. "Airframe and power plant," she said. "You would have liked the exam, mostly listening." The Thomas Delaney Fund received its initial capital allocation 4 months after the all-staff meeting. Ray had pushed for the timeline. His legal team had structured the fund correctly, as an independent entity with its own board, so that its operation wasn't contingent on Transcor's quarterly performance. The initial allocation was $5 million. Horace Webb chaired the review committee. He was a retired FAA inspector who had spent 30 years doing exactly the kind of work the fund was meant to support, finding and fixing problems in aircraft systems, hands-on, before they became incidents. He had the manner of someone who had seen every way that things could go wrong and had developed not cynicism but precision. Maya was on the committee as a member, not chair. She'd said she'd rather ask the right questions than run the table. Horace had looked at her for a moment. "Fair enough, he had said. The first cohort applications opened in October. 43 came in over 3 weeks. They came from Houston and San Antonio and Dallas, and from 3 smaller cities where word had spread through maintenance networks and ground crew circles. People who knew things, people who had been trying to use what they knew, and running into the same wall Maya had run into for 8 years. Not enough credentials. Sorry. The committee met on 4 Saturday mornings to review the applications. Maya read every one. She read them the way her father had listened to engines, patient, looking for the real thing underneath the surface presentation, looking for the person who had learned something in a way the paper trail didn't show. She found it in more of them than she expected. 8 candidates were selected for the first cohort. The orientation was on a Monday morning in the Trans Corps Training Center. 8 people, different ages and histories, and the particular combination of knowledge and constraint that the fund had been designed to address. Curtis Bridwell, 44, former military mechanic, 2 years out of the service. His skills were real and specific, and his military training during translate to civilian aviation certification without a lengthy and expensive process he hadn't been able to afford. Donna Yates, 26, from a ranch in Fayette County, where she'd been maintaining equipment since she was old enough to be useful. She knew diesel engines the way some people know their own hands. George Reeves, 51, automotive mechanic for 30 years, who had been trying to move into aviation maintenance for 6 years and kept hitting the credential wall. Andre Simmons, 32, from Dallas, who had been doing overnight maintenance cleaning at DFW for 4 years and had been noticing things about aircraft systems and writing them down in a notebook he kept in his locker. His notebook looked a lot like Maya's work order form, and 4 others, each carrying something real, each having spent time on the wrong side of a door that wouldn't open. They sat in the training room, in chairs arranged in a loose circle, looking at Maya with the careful watchfulness of people who were not entirely certain they were supposed to be there. She knew that look. She stood at the front, without notes. "My name is Maya Delaney," she said. "I'm the engine systems inspector here. 8 months ago, I was cleaning this building at 2 in the morning." She let that sit for a moment. "This fund exists because of my father. His name was Thomas Delaney. He ran a garage for 22 years, and he knew more about engines than most people with advanced degrees ever will. He tried to report a safety problem once, formally, correctly, with documentation to the right people. He was dismissed because he didn't have credentials. He lost his 3 largest clients within 4 months. He died that same year." She looked at each of them, all 8 faces. "You're here because you know things, because someone taught you, or because you are taught yourself, because you were born with the ability to hear what other people miss. That knowledge is real. We are going to help you make it visible. Put credentials around it. Not because the credentials make it more true. This knowledge is already true. But credentials make people listen, and listening is where it has to start." Curtis leaned forward slightly in his chair. "How long did it take," he said, "from where you were to where you are now?" 8 months from the night I'd heard the engine to this room," Maya said. "But it took my father 22 years to build what he built so I could be standing here offering something." She paused. "He got me here," she said. "He just didn't get to see it." Curtis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He got you here. And he said it the way someone says something when they mean it, as both a statement and a gift." Maya held that. Something moved behind her eyes. She let it just for a moment. Then she looked at the room. "Let's get started," she said. The months that followed had a different quality than anything that had come before. Not easier. She wasn't looking for easier. More aligned. More like what she was doing matched what she was capable of. It's less like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. She developed a training program for the TransCorps maintenance team. Not a formal one, nothing with a title or a certificate, just a practice she introduced. Gradually, through doing it herself and letting people watch and ask questions. The manual inspection habit. The specific quality of attention required to hear what automated systems couldn't measure. Some people took to it quickly. Some needed more time. One mechanic, a man named Parker, who had 22 years and strong opinions about the right way to do things, pushed back for 3 weeks, and then, after finding an early-stage defect himself using the physical examination method, stopped pushing back entirely, and became one of the more consistent practitioners of it. She didn't say anything when Parker changed. She just logged the catch and kept working. Darren, the team lead, noticed. He said to her one afternoon, "You know what the difference is between you and most people who come in here with new ideas?" She looked at him. "You show people instead of telling them," he said. "Most people tell, then wonder why nobody does it." She thought about that. Her father had shown her. He'd never once sat her down and said, "I am going to teach you about engines." He'd just worked with her beside him, and she'd learned. "My father showed me everything," she said. "I never thought about that until just now." Darren nodded, went back to his work. The second cohort of Thomas Delaney Fund, opened 4 months after the first orientation. 61 applications came in over 3 weeks, from Houston and Dallas and Austin, and from smaller cities in Texas, and from Louisiana and Oklahoma. Word having spread through the maintenance network and ground crew communities that the fund was real, and the process was us, and the assessment was based on what you could actually do. 71 people who knew things and had been carrying those things without an outlet for them. The review committee met on 5 Saturdays. Maya read every application. Horace read every application. The 3 other committee members read them and brought their specialents, and they compared notes and discussed and sometimes disagreed and worked through the disagreements carefully. They selected 17 candidates for the second cohort. On the last Saturday of the review, after the selection ups were finalized, Horace poured himself coffee from the carafe on the table and said to Maya, "Your father named this thing right." She looked at him. "A fund is just money," he said. "Money with the right criteria, that becomes a door. But to build the right criteria, you need someone who knows which doors were being closed and why." He looked at his coffee. "That's not a thing you can hire for. You have to have been on the other side of the door." She was quiet for a moment. "I was on the other side for 8 years." "I know," he said. That's why it works." She drove home from the committee meeting on a Saturday evening, sat in her apartment for a while without turning on any lights. The window that faced northeast was open a few inches, and she could hear aircraft on the evening departure schedule. 17 people. The second cohort. 17 people who had been carrying knowledge that nobody but would look at because of what wasn't on their resume. She thought about all the people she didn't know about. The ones who hadn't applied because they didn't know the fund existed. The ones who applied and hadn't been selected and were still on the other side of the door. The ones who had given up before she had, who had decided that the wall wasn't worth climbing anymore, that the knowledge wasn't worthy keeping if nobody would ever look at it. She thought about her father filing his complaint 10 years ago. Writing it down correctly, submitting it to the right board, waiting 6 weeks, reading the dismissal letter. How many others had done exactly that, told the truth in the right format to the right people, and been told it wasn't enough? How many machines were making sounds that nobody was listening to? She sat with that for a while. Then she got up and made tea and went back to work. On a Friday afternoon in October, almost exactly a year after she'd started at Transcorp, Maya was doing a post-repair walk-around on a freshly serviced aircraft when Ray came out of the operations building and crossed the tarmac toward her. He didn't come to the tarmac in the middle of a workday very often. She noticed his approach without stopping what she was doing. He stopped a few feet away and watched her work for a moment. "TC-204 is getting ready to push back," he said. "Houston to Atlanta. First flight on this air from since the overhaul. I thought you might want to watch." She capped her stylus, tucked the inspection tablet under her arm. They walked together to the edge of the operational boundary. Neither of them spoke. The afternoon heat came off the concrete in slow waves. Ground crew moved around the aircraft with the practiced efficiency of people who did this every day and knew exactly what came next. The engine started. Maya closed her eyes. Not because she needed to. It was just what she did, what she'd always done, since she was old enough to stand in the garage beside her father and understand that being still enough to hear was a specific skill and not a passive one. 4 engines, each one coming alive in sequence. She tracked them one by one, listening through the sound for what was underneath the sound, the way her father had shown her, the way she'd been doing her whole life. Nothing. Just the clean, even sound of fuel moving through clean injectors at the correct pressure. Combustion happening correctly. The physics of lift doing the things its mind designed to do. She opened her eyes. TC-24 was taxiing toward the runway, blue and white in the afternoon light, moving with the unhurried certainty of something large that had somewhere specific to go. It reached the runway threshold. The engines built from cruise power to takeoff power, the sound changing as the thrust increased, and then the aircraft was rolling, accelerating down the runway with the committed energy of something that has decided to become airborne. Then it was off the ground, rising, the gear folding up, the nose climbing toward the sky. She watched until it was small, then smaller, then a blue and white shape against the October sky, then gone. Ray was quiet beside her. After a while, he said, "My instructor used to say that your job is to listen to what the machine is telling you. I repeated that to myself for 25 years without always doing it." She turned to look at him. What happened? "I got good at other things," he said. "Good enough at other things that I stopped doing the one thing made me worth anything in the first place." "Are you doing it again?" He thought about it. "I'm trying to. It's slower than I expected. 25 years makes grooves in how you do things. My father said listening gets easier the quieter you get," she said. "He said most people can hear fine. They just fill all the silence before anything can come through." What? Ray looked at the sky where TC-24 had been. He was a wise man. He was a mechanic, she said. Same thing sometimes. Ray almost smiled. He would have gotten along with Pete. She didn't know who Pete was. She filed the name away to ask about later. There was time for that now. That was one of the things that was different about this part of her life, the part that had started when she followed a man through a door she'd been trying to open for 6 weeks. There was time for the secondary questions. The conversations that weren't urgent. The things you could ask because you weren't going to be asked to leave. He was good at getting along with people who took their work seriously, she said. They stood on the tarmac in the October afternoon while the sun moved and the ground crew finished their work, and the next aircraft began its departure preparations. The city went on around them, the ordinary, continuous work of an airport doing what airports do. Then Ray said he had a meeting and went back inside, and Maya went back to her aircraft. That evening, she took the long way home. She did this sometimes when the weather was good and she didn't have the early morning inspection slot. Walked instead of driving. Through streets she'd known for years in different circumstances. She went past the I-45 overpass. She didn't plan to. The route just took her there, or she let the route take her there without deciding to, which was close enough to the same thing. She stopped on the sidewalk and looked at the space under the bridge. Empty tonight, or appeared to be. The light was going, and the shadows under the concrete were deep. She stood there a while. 14 months she'd slept in that shadow. Not 14 months of misery, or not only that. 14 months of the overhead highway, and the night sounds of the city bents, and the aircraft on their schedules passing over at specific times, and the particular clarity that comes from having very few things to think about except what you know and what you're going to do with it. She'd kept her father's knowledge alive during those 14 months. She hadn't meant to, exactly. She'd just kept listening because she didn't know how not to. The listening had been there so long it was part of her breathing. She thought about Thomas Delaney filing his complaint 10 years ago, writing down what he knew in the correct format and submitting it to the right board, being dismissed in 6 weeks, losing accounts, driving home tired on a November evening, never knowing that 10 years later his daughter would be standing on a tarmac at the same airport, listening to the same problem, finally not being there anymore. She thought about Andre Simmons in the second cohort, who had kept a notebook in his locker at DFW for 4 years, writing down things nobody would look at, keeping the paper, trusting that the truth had somewhere to go even when nowhere was opening. She took out her phone, looked at the photograph she kept there now. The garage, her father in the sun. The socket wrench in his hand. Second cohort starts in 3 weeks, she said quietly. 17 people. Some of them have been waiting longer than I did. Some of them are carrying things you would recognize. She looked at him for a moment. You would have liked the fund, she said. You would have argued with Horace about the selection criteria, and you both would have been right about different things, and the criteria would have gotten better for it. She looked at the photograph a little longer. Curtis was right, she said. You got me here. An aircraft came from the east on approach, descending toward the airport. She recognized the engine profile without trying. Clean, steady, right. She tilted her head slightly and listened until it passed overhead and kept going. Then she put her phone away, turned, started walking home. The apartment was 2 miles east. She'd had it for 9 months now. 2nd floor. 1 bedroom. A window that faced northeast and caught the sound of aircraft on certain wind conditions. She'd put very little on the walls. On the kitchen counter, she kept the framed photograph of her father in a plain wood frame she'd found at a hardware store. On her desk in the bedroom, the certification textbooks, her notes on the new inspection protocol she was developing for a component that hadn't been covered in the original protocol, and the folder from the second cohort applications she'd been reviewing at home. She made tea, sat at the kitchen table. The window above the counter was open an inch, and the night air came through it, carrying the faint sound of the city, and, when the wind was right, the more distant sound of the airport. She looked at her father's photograph. 17 people Monday, she said. I'll tell them what I told the first group, that the knowledge is already real, that the paper just makes people listen. She drank her tea. Outside, an aircraft went over, high, on its way to somewhere. The sounds came through the open window, clean and steady and right. She tracked it without moving, without closing her eyes, without stopping anything she was doing. Just listening, the way her father taught her. The way she'd been doing her whole life, without always knowing she was doing it, without always knowing what it was for. Now she knew. The aircraft sound faded. She picked up her tea, picked up her pen, and kept going.